Thank you. Are here to talk about community source energy aggregation, and the City Council is going to be taking this up on the next City Council meeting on January 25th. This evening we have an opportunity to hear about what might transpire and answer questions. This turns out to be a more complicated subject than I believed when I first heard about it, so I think I'll just turn it over to Roger. And since we're videotaping this, if you have questions or comments, please ask to use the microphone so you can get a good recording. Thank you.
All right, so I have my, can everybody hear me? I have my own little mic here. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Roger Bradley. I'm with the city. I'm the Community Services Director. I'll be presenting this evening again on the Community Choice Aggregation Program that's being developed in the county through Los Angeles Community Choice Energy Authority. Really, we're looking for feedback this evening from the community on the desirability of the program. As mentioned, currently we're planning to bring this to the council on July 25th, so in a couple of weeks, or actually next week, to talk about it, assuming that we have enough community feedback and there's good feeling about how that community feedback is going. Otherwise, it could potentially push to September, October. But again, we really were looking for feedback this evening about this program, whether the community thinks that it's something that's desirable and something that you're interested in. So community choice aggregation, what is that? So back in 2002, Assembly Bill 117 was passed by, I think, then Governor Gray Davis, who basically what it allows communities to do is to aggregate the electrical demand, the energy consumption from the community, and take that and go out on the market and procure energy on behalf of its residents and businesses. In California, it's been around for a number of years since then, but there really has only been one active CCA. Well, there was one active CCA that took place in 2010, and since then a number of them have been coming on board up in Marin County, which was Marin Clean Energy. Since then, there's about 8 different active CCAs in the county, or in the state. Many of them up in Northern California. So we're getting some more down here in the South. Apple Valley and Lancaster have their own CCAs. And of course, the county itself has, which is why we're here this evening, has begun exploration of a community choice aggregation program here within Los Angeles County called the Los Angeles Community Choice Energy Authority. So if you look at traditional provision of electricity, maybe we'll get a better, clearer picture of what a CCA is. So traditionally, you have a private company that goes out and procures energy on behalf of its customers or generates that energy. Then it takes it and transmits it to your home. And then it performs all the administrative functions, customer service, billing, programs, those kinds of things. Or the other side of that spectrum, you have a municipality doing that. So it's out there procuring energy on your behalf, bring it to your home, and doing the administrative functions. Well, a CCA, or Community Choice Aggregation Program, is sort of a hybrid or middle ground approach where the community says, when there's an IOU in place, that, you know, we really don't want the investor-owned utility going out there and making decisions on the energy procurement for us. We could take that function over and let it do all the other items. It'll still transmit energy to your home. It'll still be the point of contact for customer service and billing-related issues. But we as a community want to take that function over of energy procurement and decide what our portfolio is going to look like, et cetera, as it relates to energy itself. So it's a middle or hybrid approach to bringing energy to your home. Why do you want to do something like that? So you obviously have an IOU, an investor-owned utility. There's usually a profit motive associated with their business model. Often we as a CCA can take that control of that function and do it at a cost competitive to what the investor-owned utility is able to provide to your home. And now with a CCA, when you create an additional energy option, you still have the old one in place. So for us, for example, SCE would still be able to provide energy to your home, except for now if we had a CCA in our community, you'd have an additional choice. So you could go back and forth potentially between each option and say, you know, hey, I like SCE or I like the CCA, and now there's some competition and choice in place with a new community choice aggregation program. And really, what you get with the goals of a CCA often is to come up with greener energy. So currently, SCE has a renewable portfolio standard of 28%. So 28% of its energy comes from renewable sources. With the CCA program now, we can have our local officials, representatives making a different type of decision to potentially bring in cleaner energy. than what SCE currently is doing. So they can say, you know, hey, we like to have, instead of 28%, we like to have 50% or another number be our floor of what the renewable portfolio is going to look like. So you actually can come in with cost competitive and with greener energy. And additionally, you have local control. So instead of having an investor-owned utility, a private company making decisions on your behalf, you would have your local representatives, elected officials making decisions about energy procurement here within the community on your behalf, rather than having a private company doing that for you. So as I mentioned, there's been a number of community choice aggregation programs implemented throughout the state. The county has been watching this and monitoring it over the past several years and decided that it wanted to develop its own CCA program, or at least look at the feasibility of that, and they directed their staff in March of 2015 to begin the process of looking at the feasibility of a CCA program within Los Angeles County. The staff began working on that, completed the report, took it to their board in June of 2016. As part of their report, they made sure that all the cities within the region were also included in the feasibility study to determine whether or not cities potentially might at some point want to participate. And the study found that it was financially viable, that is, they could provide cleaner energy to its residents at a cheaper price than currently is done by SCE, which of course that has some considerable environmental and economic benefits. Looking at the economic benefits, the study found that if there was a CCA program operational within the county right now, and it was consistent with the renewable portfolio standard that the renewable portfolio that SCE has, which currently is 28%, so 28% of its renewables come from renewable sources, and then the other 72% come from non-renewable sources, burning of fossil fuels, et cetera. If a CCA program were to do that, they would be able to save everyone at least 5.4%. And again, the ideal is often to have cleaner energy come into the community. So they looked at, well, what if we had a portfolio standard that was 50% renewables? The CCA program here in the county could still provide you that, so double the clean energy coming to your home and still save you 4.1% over what you're currently paying for SCE. And then often there is a package that you could opt up into with the CCA programs where you would get 100% of the energy that comes to your home from renewable sources. And a CCA program they found would be able to do that at a cost increase of 6.3%. So for example, if you have currently a $100 bill per month for energy usage, you could pay an extra $6.30 and have 100% renewable energy coming to your home. So why is that advantageous? For a couple of reasons. So let's say, for example, you are a renter or you live in an apartment building and you are not able to put on solar panels on your roof, for example. But yet you want to take the environmental benefits of having clean energy come into your home. So now instead of putting out the money from your pocket to purchase a large capital project to put on your roof, you can just go to the CCA and say, you know what, I would like to have the 100% renewable package, and I'll pay the extra $6, or 6% per month to have that clean energy coming to my home without paying the large capital expenses. So what does that mean for environmental benefits? So as you see in the picture here, this yellow-orange area, and I think that is, I'm colorblind, so hopefully that's what the color really is, represents the greenhouse gas emissions that are produced in the region from the consumption of energy from the burning of fossil fuels. If we were to come in and have a CCA program that procured energy as a baseline of 50% renewables, that would immediately reduce greenhouse gases within the community and the region by almost 10%, by 9%. And theoretically, if we had 100% across the board, you could eliminate greenhouse gas emissions within the region for energy consumption, which would be a third of the greenhouse gases reduced if that were to be the standard for the region. So there is some significant benefits environmentally from having higher, cleaner energy procured on our behalf. Looking at some of the local economic benefits, if you take that 5.3% reduction in rates over SCE, that equates to $20 million of additional revenue in the pockets of our residents and businesses, which is approximately 200 jobs for the region. And there is a lot of local development of energy projects as part of CCAs. And it's estimated now that there would be dozens of 50 megawatt type facilities needed throughout the county. Each one of those creates about 1,500 jobs and during the construction phase and 15 full-time jobs during or after construction is complete to manage those facilities. So you're looking at significant local investment in the economy to deploy renewable energy projects throughout the region. So there is some significant local investment involved with having a CCA. So this report went back to the Board of Supervisors in September of 2016. They looked at the feasibility study and said this looks like it's a viable opportunity. We'd like to expand that opportunity to cities within the region. So they directed county staff to go out to the different communities to begin to talk about, well, would the cities be interested in being a part of a CCA? And they wanted to make sure, of course, that there was equitable representation, so they developed a joint powers agreement or the governing documents that would be over a consortium of cities being involved in a CCA. Made sure that they had equal representation across the board, so one city, one vote. And they took, as a model of the governing documents, the JPA agreements from up in the north for some of the communities that have been active in CCAs for a number of years, and developed a JPA document that they thought was appropriate, and then began to work with city staffs. So myself and others, other communities have began making comments on the JPA language to make sure it was tweaked in a way that we all could be comfortable with. And they went through a complete public vetting process as well and presented it back to the Board of Supervisors in April of this year. At that meeting, the Board of Supervisors adopted the JPA language, which creates an energy authority or an effective CCA program for the whole county. They actually put up significant funding, $10 million of their own dollars in the county to start up this program so that you can actually have revenue available to actually run the program before revenues are received. So there's usually a period in between when it starts and when they actually start receiving money from customers. So there's a bridging gap of funding to help get things going. And importantly for cities, they invited us to be a part of it at no cost to us for the first 6 months. So we can join as a city, and any city in the county can join in the first 6 months for no financial requirement. So we don't have to put up any dollars to do the study. We don't have to pay to help bridge the funding gaps to start the program. This county's taking care of all of that for us. So the governing documents or the joint power agreement that has been produced says simply that everybody gets a seat at the table, everybody has one equal vote. All actions are done by majority vote, except for a couple of minor things like amending the JPA itself, which requires a supermajority or 2/3 vote to do so. There is this little odd piece here at the bottom, which there is an opportunity to veto things. So this is more for the larger cities that were involved. There is a weighted vote option that comes into play when 3 cities come together and say, well, we want 3 member agencies come together and say, we want to review this item that's been passed by the board. In which case, based on a weighted vote share, they can overturn an action, but you can't pass any items by the weighted shares vote. So it's kind of a veto mechanism to protect interests of some of the larger agencies involved with the JPA. There are a couple of standing committees, an executive and a financial, looking at some of the administrative actions of the organization. But importantly, there's a community advisory committee that would also be a part of the JPA and would report directly to the board of directors. This is members of the community in the region that would be reported to this committee and report and provide input to the board on items that you think are important, whether it be programs that they do, rates, other things. So that will be committee of residents reporting directly to the board and providing feedback, and that would be their primary function to help guide some of the decisions that the board does. And the board itself is, again, one member agency, one vote, and the director from each agency would be an elected official. So there are, of course, some risks involved with being part of a CCA, and we'll make sure that we highlight them. In particular, you can look at unfavorable changes in the market. So they're going to have to go out and procure energy on your behalf. There could be some fluctuations in how that procurement takes place. Prices could spike. High opt-out rate, so people could say, you know what, we don't really want to be a part of the CCA. So they've gone out and procured energy on your behalf, and then everybody turns around and says, you know what, we really don't want to do this, and then they're kind of left holding the costs. And then, of course, the state often is something that of a variable, what's going to pass that might potentially affect the provision of energy on your behalf through a CCA. There are ways to directly approach or deal with some of these complaints or issues. One, you can diversify your power sources, so you make sure that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. You look at longer short-term contracts, you look at different types of contracts, wind, solar, et cetera, just to make sure that you have a good portfolio and that when one fluctuates, the other might be down, so they equal each other out. The board itself, often they put together a rate stabilization fund, where basically a rainy day fund to help pay for high cost times so that you can keep the rates down without having to pass the savings on to, or the cost on to you as a resident. The agency can help subsidize or bring that down. And of course, engaging elected officials and making sure that they are aware of the importance of a CCA program to businesses and communities and our residents. The business plan itself concluded that there are no reasonable set of risk-related circumstances that would harm the ability of what's being called LACI to be competitive with SCE. And importantly, from a city's perspective, for a risk management purpose, we, as allowed in the Joint Powers Agreement, could withdraw from the program at any time. There will be, of course, some potentially penalties or fees that might have to be paid. Those currently aren't defined, and they'll be defined by the board of directors when they're finally seated. But it is allowed that municipalities could withdraw if there was a need to do so. Currently, of the 8 active CCAs in the California, no cities have ever withdrawn that staff is aware from any of the programs. So they have been fairly effective programs. Looking at what the schedule of moving forward of implementing LACI or a CCA program within the county, as I mentioned, there is a 6-month period which started on June 26th, I believe it was, with the adoption of the agreement by Rolling Hills. So there's a 6-month period from that point. So at the end of December, we can decide to become a part of the program at no additional cost to us. And the county is looking at a couple of different phases of how to roll this out. So the first phase, which would start in January, would be all municipal accounts. So all their facilities would come in as sort of an initial step. The second phase will be July of next year. So 1 year from now, they'll start to bring in their commercial industrial accounts. And then in January of 2018, they'll look to bring in all residents. The city's looking and considering doing something similar where we would bring in our city facilities first and then move forward and following sort of the phasing plan that the county set up as well. So it allows us to kind of fill things out a little bit, work out any bugs that might be there, and try to put together a successful program before all the residents and businesses come on board. With that, I will conclude my presentation, and I'll invite Mr. Bill Carnahan to come up. He is the interim executive director for LACI, and we are here to answer any questions that you may have. Again, one of the things that we really wanted to do this evening was have a nice dialogue. Please ask any questions you have. We'll try to answer them to the best of our ability. And we're really trying to get feedback on whether you think this is something that's desirable for our community. Thank you. We should sit down at the table, I guess. Take the microphone.
If there are questions from the audience, I'll give you a microphone.
Until the county ramps up additional alternative energy generation, if we start using, if we opt for higher than the 28%, does that mean that essentially Edison will just use more carbon fuel since we're using less? Will that just shift the use without reducing the use?
So Edison actually is required by state law to be at 28% of its portfolio through renewable sources. So they cannot go less than that. And we have this phone here, so this mic, so we can keep that one floating around. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Thanks. I think I've actually had the opportunity to ask this question before, but I think it may be good to ask it again and get some conversation started. Just as you've heard, Bob was wondering about the switch, and if we all really want to do 50% or 100% renewable energy sources. I mean, it's always, in my experience with SCE, they have always been very concerned about how to actually make supply satisfy demand at the same time, the same area. And I'm just, I'm just amazed and delighted at the prospect that this might work. So this is a very positive, friendly question, but I'm just trying to get as much information as I can. Where are the generators that we can use? And has someone worked out the fact that when the wind blows and the sun shines and so forth, and we're all happy, what about nighttime and when the wind dies? And someone must be thinking about this, I hope.
Okay, thank you. California is a bit unique in the fact that they have what's called the independent system operator, which operates among other things, operates the transmission grid system in California and conducts the energy market in California. Today, your energy does not come from Edison Resources. They don't own resources anymore. As a part of the industry restructuring 10 or 15 years ago, time goes by quickly, they divested of all of their generation, which is what makes this work, because you're not then idling any of their generation, nor the opportunity for them to earn a profit. I mean, they're an investor-owned utility, so they profit for their shareholders by making investments and getting guaranteed returns on those investments. So the fact that they don't own generation means they go into the market, either short-term, medium-term, long-term contracts, to acquire their energy. And as a matter of fact, they don't make profit on that energy, which is why they're sort of ambivalent to what's going on here. It will, by taking customers, energy customers, if you will, out of their service and putting them into the JPA's service, they're revenue neutral. All the other parts of their system that are used, the carriage of the transmission, the delivery, the billing, all of that is paid for by the LACE customers in the same amount as their remaining customers pay. So they're revenue neutral. There's no subsidization going back and forth. So LACE will do exactly what they do, and that is we'll have a power supply expert. Actually, we're going to contract it, who will use the same computer programs, the same probability curves, all that kind of thing, to actually place a portfolio, partly long-term. We expect we'll have contracts with actual suppliers and actual projects. And if you go short-term, you can buy out of the market. And that's where you're assured you can meet the hourly demands of the customers, because the market is really less than, it's actually a 15-minute market, but you can actually buy in and out of that market. So unless for some reason there was a shortage overall of supply, because remember, we're not adding customers, we're just shifting customers, so it doesn't put additional demands on the system, except to the extent that we have more customers that go to 50% or 100%. Now you have higher demand on the renewables, but quite frankly, that's where the state's headed anyway. We're just doing it quicker. So I don't know if does that answer the question? It's kind of a long-winded answer, but it's kind of nice to know how all that fits together.
This is new to me, so I'm a little confused by it. But in particular, what about people who are generating their own electricity during the day, and how does that impact them? This sounds like it will draw in people who aren't generating their own to use solar power or something else. But what about the people who already are?
It will not affect them at all. In fact, the intent is that the way to look at it really is the rates that are charged by LACE are really the same. If you have a rate or a service from Edison today, you will continue that service under LACE. For example, some people have levelized billing, and they have a true-up in the 12th month. That will be offered as well. So think of it in terms of the Edison rates discounted. And so whatever arrangement that you have with them, you can keep. But the nice part of the program is, if for some reason you don't feel like you're going to get it, or you don't like the concept, you can opt out and go back to Edison and stay right where you are. So the citizens here and the city council, if they were to vote to create the CCA, are not tying you in to anything. You still have actually more options than you have today. So whatever arrangement that is, it would stay. And if you didn't feel like it was the same, then you could opt out and go back to what you had before.
And I was just going to add too, because there might be a question there about whether or not solar is still a viable alternative, and it is. I mean, you're still paying for energy. So if you can save energy by putting on solar on your roof, it still is an option for you to proceed with. The only difference is now with the CCA, you're a little bit cheaper than SCE potentially was, but you still could cut your bill out if you were to install solar on the roof. So that helps a little bit too.
I have read that California sometimes generates more energy than it can use, and it's actually paying other states to take some of that energy. Will the CCA affect that, or will that affect the CCA?
Well, in reality, it probably will help, because the more renewable demand there is, you're less likely to have surpluses. And you're right, it's primarily the PV systems are on during the daytime along with the wind. They're additive. At night, the PV's not on, the wind's still there. And there are hours, and they're becoming more frequent because supply and demand and projects are being built, that we actually over generate during some of the peak hours during the day as a state through the market. And rather than shut down units and then an hour later bring them back on, some generators are not made to do that. You can't. There's some minimum level you have to maintain. We actually pay to have others take that energy, and this, to the extent that our renewable portfolio is a higher percentage than Edison's, that will actually help that situation.
Just as a request for clarification, does that mean that our percentage renewable portfolio might fluctuate during the day as long as it averages out?
Yeah, renewables, wind is particularly variable because the wind is not constant. It has variations even on a windy day. But so are the solar panels, because the clouds come over and you have things that affect them. And so they're not smooth curves. But if you have enough of them in the system, it really won't matter. What gets delivered to you will be balanced out so that you will not see in your portfolio any variability.
This is new to me too, and I appreciate everything that you laid out, but I'm not clear about who gets to decide what. So because there's the county effort, does that mean Claremont does or doesn't have the opportunity to make its own organization? Like, what does the city of Claremont get to decide? And then what does each individual in the city of Claremont get to decide as far as energy usage? And given that we have the 6-month grace period, then what would the cost be to the city after that? And is there anything else that's unique to Claremont in terms of this decision that might not have factored into the presentation you gave at the county level?
Let me make sure I can. It's a lot there. So the first one is there is a joint powers agreement that would be put in place, and what that does is it creates an independent, standalone organization separate from the city and separate from the county and any other organization within the region. It becomes its own governmental agency, in essence, that's governed by the member agencies, which would be, in our case, the county. If the city were to be a part of it, we would be on the board of directors. So instead of a city council, you'd have a board of directors who all would vote on policies for that organization. So in our case, we'd have one representative from the city of Claremont that would sit on that board, and they collectively, as a board of directors, would make the decisions on what level of energy they would procure, what type of rates they would set. And so our elected official would be on that board and be elected by city representatives from Claremont, citizens of Claremont, but they would work with the other member agencies to come up with policies as it affected you as your energy procurement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got that from your presentation, but my question is a little outside of that.
Okay.
So it's more, is there another way of doing it, or is that it?
There is another way.
Did the county, does that structure going through the joint powers agreement with the county, is that all that's available to Claremont, either as a city or to Claremont residents as individuals?
Got it.
For participating in this alternative to
The only other option would be if the city were to decide to go alone and create its own CCA program just for Claremont, in which case the city council would be the elected body that would represent you. The difference, that city would have to bear all the costs of formation and getting that started. So in this case, the county has decided to do all that for us. But the city could do it alone, that would be correct. But that's the
So-
only other option that would be out there.
So not to take the whole rest of the night by myself with the microphone, if you could just speak to whether there's anything you can offer as far as whether there's any downside to doing it through the county, and also that piece about what our expenses would be as a city after the first 6 months. Anything else that's unique to us? And then I still don't get it. Could I, as an individual resident, then be choosing, what do we as individual residents get to choose?
So the residents get to choose what portfolio packages are put together and offered as energy packages to you. So for example, they could do, let's say there's 3 options in this case. Maybe they say that they'll provide a package similar to what SCE currently has at 28%. So that'd be one option. And then they let you have an option to opt up to different types of things. So one of them could be a 50% renewable package. And they can say, well, if you want to be more green, then you could purchase up and be a customer that gets 50% of its renewables, or even potentially up to 100%. So they could have some different options for you as a resident to choose which you would like to be a part of, depending on whether you want to save money potentially or whether you want to be greener. So that would be your option.
Just mention that the city would be asked to set a default rate based upon what they thought the majority of the citizens want to have, because you have to start somewhere. And so the first decision the city would make would be to tell LACE, we think our community is, the majority of the folks are going to go 50%. So that's where all the customers would start, but before they actually take any service, you'll get to choose whether you want to opt up to 100%, stay at 50, or drop down to 28%, okay? Each individual customer, And the reason for those 3 rates, by the way, is that some communities and some citizens want the cheapest energy they can get. And if that's what you want, you do the 28%. If you want to be greener, if you will, then you pick the other options. And what it shows is you're not paying a terrible penalty to do that. The rates comparisons that were here were to what you're paying today, the base rate. So you could go to 50%, from 28 to 50% renewables, and still save about 4% on your energy bill. If you wanted to go to 100%, compared to what you're paying today as a base rate, it would be 6% higher, but it's about 12% below what Edison's 100% rate is. So you save money comparatively, whichever one you pick, but you get the option to do that. And if you don't like any of those, you can opt out and go back to Edison, okay?
Every community gets to choose that for themselves.
Yes. And the Joint Action Agency is actually captures the economies of scale. If you're in the energy market, by collectively going in together rather than Claremont by itself, you can save money. You can spread the costs per unit costs over the staffing levels, and those the contracts that you have to sign become cheaper. So the economies, and it's nonprofit. LACE, as the city, doesn't pay taxes, and so doesn't generate a profit as the investor-owned utilities do to pay their shareholders. So that's another hedge that you have in terms of reducing the costs.
The last thing was the 6-month grace period. Then what is the cost to the city?
Currently, that'll be up to so the board hasn't seated yet for Lacey. When they seat and they actually start developing standard operating procedures for the agency, that'll be defined at that time. So it's not known what that might be. It's not anticipated to be completely expensive, I'd imagine, in the beginning, as they are still ramping up and growing, but it's not known at this time what that amount would be.
I think what's unknown is if you join and then get out. In 6 months, you actually have the free choice. After that, if you choose to get out, the JPA, LACE, may have made contracts, for example, which you voted on as a city, and now you want to get out. You can't leave your remaining partners with stranded costs. In other words, most in contract law, that's what you walk away. You have to clear it for everybody. And since we don't know what contracts LACE will be making during that period, you can't put a number on it, but it's an equity issue. You've got to make sure you don't leave your remaining partners holding the bag. Now, coming in for the first 6 months, that's really as much a tool to get folks to join early, because one of the things we want in the JPA is a functioning full board. We'd like to have 8 or 10 or 12 cities in, so we have a robust board, because there are decisions that board has to make with regard, basic decisions on how the JPA is going to operate. When the county worked with the cities, including Claremont, to put the JPA documents together, the thought was, we're not all knowing here, and so we probably should do the minimum amount to put the structure together to let the folks who are actually going to come in and operate this entity have maximum say in how it's going to operate. So in order to encourage that, we're going to say, well, we're going to kind of ramp in. Some of the JPAs that exist up north started with their full complement membership. Day one, they had 15 or 20 members, and so they had a full board to start with. Here, we're having people come in one at a time, if you will, so we're going to ramp up basically to a full board. So we want to leave as many of the decisions as we can until we have a full complement of boards. So it's going to step in as we go along, including the Citizen Advisory Committee. All it says in the enabling agreements is there will be a Citizen Advisory Committee. It doesn't say how they're chosen. It just says there will be one. And so the board will decide how they're chosen. Is it one, each member gets to appoint a member, or you do it at large and then pick them by disciplines, or whatever you want to do? That's up to the board. That hasn't been set yet. So it's an inducement to come in early, and as during that first 6 months, there may in fact be some commitments made that at the end of the 6 months, if a member wants to come in 9 months, the board may say, wait a minute, we've expended some funds already, and you can't just walk in the door and pick up, the next day like you're a fully functioning member that's been here forever. There's got to be some advantage maybe for folks who have been here early. So they may decide that there's actually a buy-in fee of some kind. They want to encourage new members, but that's really up to them. That decision hasn't been made. We're just telling folks we think it's going to take 6 months to get up to the full complement, and then we have to start making some real decisions to make the entity go. And quite frankly, the more members we get in that first 6 months, the better it's going to be for everybody. So that's kind of a long answer, but that's really, there's a couple of aspects to it.
Did we answer all your questions? Make sure we hit the...
If LA County has, let's say, 70 cities, is the thought that there would be one joint powers group for the whole county, or would they divide into several different ones? And how is that going to be decided if there's a choice?
So currently there's only Lacey within the county. If other agencies decided not to be a part of that and create their own agency, that could happen, but currently there's only one program available.
You could have all 70 cities in the one group, or you could have several groups.
No, there would be no splitting the agency. They would have to form their own. So you'd have just one group. That would be.
But it might be at that point the board might decide 70 members on a board is pretty unwieldy to make some kinds of decisions. So they might choose to have an executive committee and give them some power. That's really up to them. But they would all be in the same agency under the same conditions and have the same votes as everybody else. But the board could figure out how to deal with that size of board, which could be a little unwieldy. But
at the present, it's just one committee.
Yes.
One agreement.
And any changes to that, to accomplish that, would have to be through an amendment to the JPA, which would require 2/3 of the cities involved to do that.
What is Southern California Edison's critique of this? Presumably, they may disagree with and not want this, and I'm curious about what they would say or what they are saying.
So officially, SCE is neutral on this. They are required by state law not to have an opinion. And so I don't know how they would react unofficially, but that's their official stance.
For any business that begins, when you assess how many customers or clients that you need to begin, you have in your business plan some theory of what is a breaking point. We need this many customers for the first 3 months, for the first 6 months to be viable. And the plan, hopefully, is to make the power more affordable than what Edison offers. What is the point, the breaking point of members to join that we need to make our bargaining power such that we know the power will be more affordable than Edison. For example, if only 2 people join, I couldn't imagine our bargaining power is very good on the energy market.
Let me start off, and I'll pass it over to Bill. One of the things I may have failed to mention is that part of the AB 117, the CCA law that was passed in 2002, says that when a CCA is formed, all members of the community are opted in automatically to the new CCA. Then those residents and businesses can choose to go back or stay with SCE, but there's an automatic bringing over all the demand to the CCA. Then individual residents can decide whether they want to do that or not, but that's what the law requires.
But I think there is no magical plateau that you have to creep up to before it becomes economical. It is economical with the county going alone. If the county just wanted to do its own thing, it would be economical, not as economical as if they have 24 partners. Okay, so you're actually just optimizing as you go, but there's not one trigger point that says we have to hit a certain level before it makes sense. Because there are Lancaster's an individual CCA, and look how small it is. So is Apple Valley. They chose to go on their own, and save their customers money. We just don't think that they're going to save as much, quite frankly. And so one of the 2 things that if I might just take a second, 2 things that we haven't talked about today is the opt-out rate. What has the experience been for the existing CCAs, some of which are 10 years old, in terms of customers choosing to go back to their investor-owned utility suppliers? And the opt-out rate, or the non-opt-out rate is 95%. Less than 5% of the customers over those times, over all those CCAs, have chosen to go back to their native investor-owned utility provider. The California Public Utilities Commission staff drafted a white paper on the future of CCAs about 2 months ago. And one of the things that was very interesting to me in terms of, is this a passing fancy or is it going to not be widely adopted? They are estimating that by the end of this year, the end of 2017, 25% of all the investor-owned utility customers that were there a year ago will be served by a CCA, 25%. By the mid-20s, 2025, the investor-owned utilities will have lost 85% of their customer base. Now that tells you this is not going to be like a boutique operation. It's going to be very widespread in California because of the benefits, local control, rates are made locally. The board will be responsible for that, not the California Public Utilities Commission in San Francisco. So just to show you that the success rate and historical operation of these have been pretty successful.
I was wondering if you could speak to why Lancaster and Apple Valley chose to do it on their own, and if you have any feedback from them about how that's gone. And my second question is, I don't know a lot about how cities engage with utilities, and I'm wondering, when we do have to pay to participate, what budget line or what funds the city of Claremont has to then pay to participate?
Let me answer the last one first. There's no funds that will flow from the city to LACE, the JPA. The only revenues that the entity has is from the sale of energy. So it would be individual customers paying some adder on their bill, probably a fraction of a penny or something, but it's not like a bill would come to the city and they'd have to take it out of their budget, okay, first of all. Now, with regard to what motivated Lancaster and Apple Valley, let me just start out by saying you saw the number of agencies up north. All of those are joint action agencies. Marin County, Silicon Valley, Peninsula, and they have 20, 25, 30 members. It's usually a county kind of an operation. So there really are no standalones in the north. So that was not the model. And so I don't really know why. I guess there were no partners, or they hadn't thought about recruiting partners. And Apple Valley's kind of remote out there. I don't really know, but they're the exceptions to the rule of the way JPAs and CCAs have developed in California.
You have said that you're going to develop generating capacity. Are you also going to have batteries that will store the energy for when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine?
Well, certainly the LACE board will have to take a look at what kind of portfolio they want to develop. And my guess is, since the investor-owned utilities are making investments in that technology, that supply and demand, you would guess that it would probably come down, and if they're proven to actually stabilize the portfolio for reliability purposes, then I would suspect LACE would take a look at that as well.
I just add that with a CCA program, you now have a board that's locally elected and that you could talk to your representative, and they create energy efficiency and rebate programs, other things that might be advantageous to you as a homeowner or a business. And so you now have somebody you can go to directly to represent you in your interest in those type of programs, and they can make those decisions if they decide it was viable and appropriate on your behalf.
Full disclosure, I'm on the city council. I wanted to go last. And I have not made up my mind about this. I still have a lot of reading to do, and I'll hear all the public testimony at the city council. First of all, I just heard the word generation. The CCA is not going to generate electricity or store electricity. Is that correct?
Well, a lot of CCA programs have goals to generate renewable energy locally. And so they do programs to establish those types of things. So I think Marin has a rooftops program, it calls, and they lease space on residents' house tops to deploy renewable energy. And then they are then generating energy for their program, and then they can inject that back into the homes and businesses in their region.
Now I'm going to sound a little like a curmudgeon, but Yogi Berra once coined the phrase, it's deja vu all over again. We did, years ago, we attempted in California to deregulate electricity and have people produce and sell it. And we all know how that turned out. This sounds an awful lot like that program. Is it like that program? What safeguards are there that it's not going to go all belly up?
Okay, well, it has some attributes of that, but we think we've learned from past experiences. At that time, you remember, if you see the block diagram up here, the investor-owned utilities were called vertically integrated. They did the generation, transmission, distribution, customer service. They were responsible, in fact, were obligated to meet all of those needs. And when California deregulated to give competition in the energy business, they directed those utilities to divest all of their generation. And that created some chaos. In some cases, the investor-owned utilities sold their generation assets here, took the money back to New England and invested in power plants in New England. But also at that time, the cost of renewables in the portfolio is extremely high. One of the reasons the CCAs can exist today, and quite frankly, prices have moderated, is renewable costs have come down. The theory was you create the supply, create the demand, the supply will follow. You get enough supply, prices are driven down. And that's been true for renewable PV systems and for wind generation. And so today you have you also today have a functioning market in California. Right now, the investor-owned utilities buy out of that same market that we're going to be buying out of. So it's not like we're having to go somewhere else, we're idling this or impacting that. And for that reason, you're only replacing the component of their business that they don't make any profit on anyway. So you're not affecting their business model bottom line. You're redefining their business model as a carrier and a provider of the billing and whatnot, but we pay for that. That actually is saving them money, or at least keeping them whole. So it's a little complicated, but the lay of the land is totally different than it was back then. And I lived through that, so it was terrible.
You mentioned the marketplace, and we have a marketplace now, and there is some overhead to that we pay, and there might be savings, except I would imagine there's going to be some overhead for us too, because there's going to be somebody doing the same thing. So how do we know that we're going to be able to acquire the experts to get in that marketplace and buy this electricity at the reduced cost, wouldn't it cost pretty much the same as the cost right now?
Well, I think we've alluded to some of the cost savings potential, the fact that we're nonprofit for one thing, that'll give you a hedge right off the bat. But the experience of the CCAs and JPAs that exist today have demonstrated the ability to provide service at 5% or so under the incumbent investor-owned utility. They've been doing it for, Marin's been in the business 12 years, I think. Okay, so history has shown us it's doable. The feasibility study that the county did took a look at what are the market variances. I think we mentioned some of the risks, what happens in the market, and those were all assessed. What is our ability to attract a staff? Can you hire the talent that you need? And the conclusion was, yes, it is, and what is being claimed is real. And in fact, the county then went out and did what they call a peer review. They hired another engineering company to come in and review that report and say, is it too optimistic? Does it look like it's going to be real? And that company actually came back and said, well, we think it's a bit too conservative. So actually, so that's a way that you can judge. It's like any project you go into. There's some uncertainties, and you try to identify them all, quantify the risks, figure out how you mitigate the risks. You can't eliminate all the risks, but the portfolio management that we'll use is exactly the same as what the investor-owned utilities use and have used. It's what the municipal utilities use. You buy hedges, you do different kinds of things to mitigate your risk going forward. Legislative risk, we'll probably have somebody on the staff that'll spend a lot of time in Sacramento making sure that nothing happens up there that detrimentally affects, along with the other CCAs, our business model. So that's about the best. I can't guarantee it, but I can tell you it's been looked at from several different directions, and history tells us that it can be done.
And just a couple more quick questions. If I pay to receive electricity produced with renewable sources, what guarantees me that I, or the system, is getting that percentage of that system? What audits are there to guarantee that I'm paying a higher rate, I want 100% renewable, that my usage is at least represented there?
Right, and obviously we can't color the kilowatt hours red and green and blue. So what you have to do is you do the sort of a mass analysis where you take energy in, less losses, and how many customers do you have at 50%, 100%, and you add all that up, and it better balance out. And actually the PUC gets that report every year. And I suspect we'll do the same thing as the investor-owned utilities do now. And every year we do a power content label that tell you what the mix is in the supply. So there's ways to actually prove, your meter isn't going to register green kilowatt hours, but we can assure you, because everything is going to total out, that we've met all of our demands of the various customers and it's in balance. That's the way that works.
And is there any guarantee that if I, as a user, opt out and say, I just want it the way it was, that if this all falls apart and there's some liability that has to be paid to get this all back to ground zero, is there any liability for those people who opted out to say, look, I opted out a long time ago, don't charge me anything because I'm done?
Yeah, they will actually be balanced out when they leave. And so if the city were to decide to go out 5 years after that, you're right, they've been out, they've taken care of their obligations. It's important to note, though, if the JPA itself goes under, it's a lot like an LLC in the private sector. The debts of the JPA are not the debts of the city. They're the debts of the agency, so that the cities aren't at risk of having to write checks upon a failure of the JPA. Okay, I think is an important point to note here, and it's a lot like the mirror of the private sector and able to do that. It can sue and be sued in its own name. It can sell tax-exempt revenue bonds to finance projects that are not on the books of the cities, and it's paid for from the revenues from the sale of energy to the customers, because they're revenue bonds, not general obligation or anything like that. Okay? Did I answer your question?
Sorry, I just want to beat this dead horse one more time. I'm reminded of historically 2000, 2001, which was the California energy crisis, which may in fact have been fraudulent, but nevertheless, it was an experience for everyone who was living here at the time. That was, ISO played a very strong role in that, trying to make supply match demand, et cetera. What is different now when ISO is again has the job of balancing supply and demand? How is there a different environment, a different situation in terms of generation and market that will preclude the recurrence of that disaster?
As near as I can explain, what happened before was not a supply and demand problem. It was a pricing problem. The cost of the renewables that were being mandated into the mix were very, very high. And to avoid rate shock, the legislature said that rates were frozen for 3 or 4 years. And as soon as the rate freeze went off, San Diego rates doubled overnight. Okay, so it wasn't supply and demand, it was the pricing. It was artificially constrained in prices. PG&E went bankrupt, you remember? The investor-owned utility? Because they had a cap on what they could sell it for, but no cap on what they had to buy it for. So that crisis was really a crisis of economics, not of supply and demand, okay?
I have a question. I'm not sure I fully understand why it is that if you buy 28% or 50% renewable, you save money, but if you go to 100% renewable, you lose money. Is that because there are county subsidies that have gone into it? Is it because there's more latitude in not having to shut down plants and that sort of thing?
No, I think if you looked at the actual percentages that it was under, the 28% percentage was like 6%, I think. And then at 50%,
5.3, something like that.
and at 50%, it dropped to 4%.
Yes.
So because you have more renewables, so it didn't stay the same. Your savings were less as you went up in the percent of renewables. So when you went to 100, so you went from 25 to 50, so it's this much. And then when you go from 50 to 100, then it's a bigger jump. And so the jump will take you above their base rate, but only slightly, but it is above because as you put in more renewables today, the cost goes up.
And as the cost of renewables go down, would that likely turn around?
Yeah, that will help that situation. Yep.
And just to be clear, that was against their base rate. So if SCE were to provide you 100%, that 6% would change, and it would be much, much less costly than what SCE would charge you for that same amount. So don't mix those two up. That's just based on those rates compared to SCE's current rate.
What you're paying today on your bill, not if you had 100%. If you had 100% renewable rate from Edison, LACE will be 8 or 9% below. If you have a 50% rate from Edison, we would be probably 7% below. But we're comparing here to the base rate, what customers are paying today. So if you wanted to sort of compromise and be a little bit green, you could do it at the 50% level and still have a lower electric bill than you have today. That's really the sort of the
initial
sweet spot, if you will.
28% is exactly what's going on today. There
The 28?
28%, the initial 28%.
That's where they are today, but they have to be at 33% by 2020,
Yeah,
I think. And then
but
it's
that 28% assumes the present mix and not any new.
Yes. And as that goes up, as that base goes up, then LACE will have to comply with that also. So from year to year, the LACE board will have to adjust those rates, based upon what the law says for one thing. But that's a local decision, not a California PUC decision.
You may have already answered this, but I'm not sure. If a local community generates power at a lower rate and feeds into the system, can they adjust their local rate to reflect that?
Well, you'd actually do like the homeowners today. If they have surpluses, they sell it back into the system. So and use that money to offset the cost of the system or parts of the cost of the system. And the community could do the same. If you build a project here, you'd in effect be running it behind your master meter at the border, if you will, And so you get credit for that because in effect that energy would go into the market. So you could sell it just like a homeowner could sell it.
Other questions?
So couldn't it happen that if all these customers are now having access to up to 100% renewable with such ease, that in terms of supply and demand, that would drive up the cost of the renewables even as they're becoming more efficiently created? And that's one question. The other is, this only happens in Claremont if the city council commits the city to be part of it. You cannot, as an individual, be making this decision unless the city has committed.
That's correct. That's correct. It is a commitment of the city council by resolution to join, and they give the customers the choice, including staying where they are.
And everybody, I know you had this at the very beginning of the presentation, but I didn't hold on to it in my head. Everybody gets the bill from Southern California Edison.
Yeah, there'll just be, actually, the way that's gonna work is there will actually just be an additional page on the bill that will be the CCA page, the LACE page, and it will only be the energy portion. The rest of the bill will stay the same, except their energy delivery will go down, but it'll look the same. It'll all be the same, except there'll be another accounting page on there to account for the deliveries made by LACE.
So I don't want to lose the part of my question about the cost of supply and demand, but when I think about something at the county level with 70 cities, I want to think it's great because of economies of scale and all the things you're talking about, but that also means a very complicated bureaucratic world. And so I still keep coming back to what's Claremont's decision on their options, but so that I have the best understanding of what's being decided on our behalf. And this would be done by resolution, is that correct?
Yeah, ordinance, I guess. Well, when you think of the county in this project, this is not an agency or a division within the county. They are one vote on the board, and the board is the entity that we're talking about here, not some huge county operation, and that's by design. I don't think you want to be a part of that, and one of the reasons I was brought on board is I'm not a county employee, so I came from the outside, and I know the sensitivity, because I worked with city councils over the years, that there's a certain amount of apprehension in working with the county, and especially if you think they're going to run you over. And so one of the reasons for one entity, one vote is that's the way most JPAs work, but that just means the county's one vote on the board. They're not driving the train here. So I think you ought not think of this being a part of some huge bureaucracy, and because you're going to be on the board and have a representative on the board to build this entity, you can build it. We think it's going to be very lean and mean. We're going to try to do all that we can by contracting out, unless contracting doesn't make sense. So the core is going to be maybe a dozen people, okay, running the agency. I came from a joint action agency of municipally owned utilities, and I had a $750 million a year budget, and I had 12 people on the staff, So don't think of it in terms of a huge bureaucracy, primarily because you don't do operations. We don't have crews that build transmission lines. We pay Edison to do that. We don't have a huge accounting system over here to do the billing. We pay Edison to do that. In terms of resource planning, we have a consultant that does that, so we're not going to try to staff up and do all the operations. We'll have staff to coordinate those functions. We'll have staff to look at long-term planning, that kind of stuff, but not a huge operations, okay? And the question is then, as we go to more renewables, the projection is that the renewable prices are going to continue to come down, okay, over the next 4 or 5 years, continue the downward trend. So actually, the more every increment that you add is cheaper than the one you have in the mix. So growth is actually a good thing in this case. So that's kind of the way it's looked at in the short term and the longer term. That it isn't going to drive costs up. That the bigger you are, economies of scale, the price goes down. Okay. You seem puzzled. That didn't answer your question. Well, you're not. I wouldn't play poker if I were you.
Tom?
My reaction at this point is that this is a no-lose situation for the city. As long as you can get out, if you don't like what's happening without cost, you might as well get in and take advantage of it if you like what's happening.
Thank you for the feedback. I will point out, though, that there could potentially be costs to get out, but there is always an option to get out. Yes. And yeah, if there's other feedback about opinions about participating, we love to hear that too, so we can take it back. Well, the mayor's here, but we also will take comments back as well to the council to know what the community's thinking.
I actually had another question. So I'm understanding that you're looking at getting energy from renewable resources so that we can feel better that we're not producing as much pollution and, saving the planet for our children. And I'm just wondering also, will there be options for customers to think about things such as, where are these solar panels coming from, and are we okay with how those were produced? Or I just worry sometimes when I hear about costs going down. Well, does that mean the labor is not being treated fairly and things like that? And in general, I'm hopeful that yes, green energy is becoming more cost effective for the right reasons, but I just wonder if you have ideas that your board wants to adhere to in terms of that, and what our choices might be.
So if we participate as a city, then that would be your board as a resident. You can now have, instead of going to the PUC or going to SC, you have actually a local elected official representative that you can go talk to about some of those things that you think are important. There'll be a community advisory committee that'll be putting input into the board about those very issues, where things are locally, those decisions are now made locally rather than by a private company through the PUC. So I think now we have greater control over those kinds of things that to be decided locally. Yeah.
State the question. Larry, I don't think it works. I think the battery might have. Oh, battery's on. Might have got it on. So I just want to restate the question that we get in for free now, but there may be, because we haven't seen any paperwork whatsoever, there may be a cost of getting out if we want to get out. That's correct.
Okay, and we don't even have, and we don't have any idea what that cost might be.
We don't currently know what the cost will be because the board hasn't been seated to make that decision yet. So there's two thoughts to it. One, could get in early and shape that decision, or wait till later and see what it is. So there's two ways to look at it, I guess. But there would be a cost, and I would assume it'd be the cost of selling off the energy they procured on behalf of the community. So if there was some losses there, I would assume that we'd have those costs pass on to us, as well as any administrative discharge costs. Bill.
I think the other thing to be aware of is the timing here. The citizens of Claremont wouldn't receive energy from LACE for a year. Remember, phase one is January. Those are the county loads that they're on, and the reason for doing that is if there's any billing glitches, we don't want to affect the residential, a lot of our customers. You don't have them all in a tizzy. The county is one customer. They have lots of load. So let's try that for 6 months, make sure all the kinks are worked out. And the first deliveries to the cities don't start until June of 2018. So the 6 month time period is long before you're actually going to incur a lot of expense in operating and delivering under this system. And to the extent it is delivered, it's to the county first. So that doesn't affect you all either. So the worry about significant costs of getting out would be for contracts, for example. A power purchase contract, and you're a piece of that, and you voted for it, now you want to get out. Now what do? You can still sell the energy on the marketplace, so it's not like the gross amount is going to be idled, but there could be some penalties for getting out of that contract. But that's going to be a year down the road at a minimum. So I don't think there's a lot of risk of high cost exposure, if any, the first 6 months for sure. I think that's an important consideration because we're still going to be in the startup phases, and we'll have the training wheels on while we get the kinks worked out with the county before it affects anybody else. And I think by then we'll be in pretty good shape. You'll know whether you like it or not, basically.
But I will say there will be a cost. So if that's something we wanted to explore.
This has 2 batteries in it. There was only 1 spare, but it has 4 bars.
My question is, have any other cities in LA County signed on, and which ones?
Currently, I understand that the city of Rolling Hills is a member. They've signed on. The cities of Calabasas as well as South Pasadena have also done so, and then a number of cities I know are in the process of evaluating. So far, 3 cities.
We've been making presentations. There are 3 of us involved in the county, and on most Tuesday nights, we're somewhere doing it. So we've probably talked to a couple of dozen city councils, and some are in getting ready to adopt the resolution next meeting. I mean, there's a number of them lined up. So we are underway, but we've only been doing it for about a month. So that's why we're not very robust yet.
And so with more jurisdictions weighing the decision, let's suppose several agree to, when would the first board meeting be?
Actually, we do have some members now, and there are some things. We have to file an implementation plan with the state PUC, for example. And so we're going to have our first board meeting in about 2 weeks. There may only be 3 board members at that point, but we need them to take action on some things to actually officially get the JP up and running. They're not controversial or ministerial kinds of changes that we need to take. So we'll actually be starting to have board meetings. Again, minimum amount of work because we want to get more members to participate before we make the big decisions, but we'll actually be up and starting to put the pieces together in a couple of weeks.
Where's Claremont in the process?
So currently we went to the city council, I think at the end of May. We received direction from the council to reach out to the community to get some feedback on whether this is something of interest for the community to participate in. And this is our 3rd meeting. We've had 2 meetings, one before the Parks, Hillside, and Utilities Committee, as well as one before the Community and Human Services Commission. And this is our 3rd dialogue, and depending on the outcome tonight, we are planning to go to the City Council on the 25th, where they could potentially take action on participating, or it could be put off to a future date as well. So.
Anybody else?
And while I was walking there, of course, I just want to mention too that both I and Mr. Carnahan are available after this meeting for any other questions that you might have too as well. So we'll leave our contact info up here for you.
I believe that Active Claremont meets on Thursday night, and this is the meeting at which once a year they talk about what issues they want to have discussed at future meetings, but there might still be time for some presentation. You might want to talk to the president of Active Claremont and see if they can squeeze you in.
Sure, I could reach out to her.
I was just wondering if someone contacts our Sustainability Resource Center and wants to give input, should they contact you at the Community Services Department?
Yeah, please have them contact me, and if there's any questions that I can answer, I can always contact Mr. Carnahan.
Great, thank you.
Roger's given us enough. He does it better than I do now.
Thanks.
Good. So if community wants to watch it on the Sustainable Claremont website, it's there, hopefully. Thank you.
And if for some reason it doesn't make it to the 25th meeting, we'll make sure the information gets out to the public about when we expect it to go back to council.
Anybody else?
Yes, over here.
Oh, sorry.
The idea of a board beginning with 3 members and then maybe having 6 members and 12 or, however it goes, seems as though I've just never heard of that. And it seems a little iffy to me. So I would like a little more understanding of how that would work. But also, I am concerned about the emphasis on contracting out, partly because I am concerned about wages for people in working situations. So those are two things that concern me, if you could just comment on them.
So I think the first question is, how does the process work for ramping up? Is that, or why was it that chosen, I guess? Maybe that was the question.
Well, I can see why it happens, but how will that change the dynamic? I mean, won't it change the dynamic as, say, a more conservative city and a more liberal city comes onto the board?
Yeah, true, and I guess philosophically, you have to look at what makes the most sense for the city. Do we want to get on board early and make sure that we are involved in and a part of that process? Because there's a lot of rules and regulations and policies that have to be adopted for the organization going forward. From a staff perspective, it probably makes sense to be a part of that, to steer the ship rather than let it be steered and figure out where it went. But again, at the same time, it could be done on the other side where we just kind of let things develop and see how they go, and if we're comfortable with it, then join. But that would be ultimately a council decision and for how they want to tackle that problem. The other part, as far as contracting goes, I mean, that may be the initial thought about how that works, but again, that hasn't been defined, and that will be developed and recommended by the board of directors once they're seated. Currently, right now, we just have the articles of incorporation or the joint powers agreement itself in place, which speaks nothing about how that's going to be done. But the board of directors will make those decisions when they're seated. Although I will say that in the JPA, there is a lot of language about looking at workforce development, looking at local programs to help make sure that money is spent in the economy, that prevailing wages and living wages are maintained. So there is actually some language in the guiding documents that speak to those issues. So thank you.
I agree with the two women who already made the point about the importance of the values with which we pursue the economic efficiency. And I also would like to know what the feedback was from the other two, the commissions that you spoke to. Are they also seeming to be supportive in their, I realize if it was just a presentation, they didn't get to vote on anything, but how's it going?
So both the committee and the commission recommended participation in the program to the council. So we'll take those recommendations from both the committee and the commission back, along with the feedback that we've heard at this meeting as well. So I'll just say again, while there's a moment of pause, if there's any information that you'd like to ask after this meeting or right afterwards, we'll both be here for a few minutes to answer any questions. And please feel free to reach out to us. I'll have some cards up here if you'd like to take them with you to kick over any message, any questions you have. I'll be happy to discuss them with you as well.
Anybody else? Last chance. Can I just ask the guiding? Wait. I know you can handle it on your own, Kate.
You mentioned the guiding documents. Are those available for us to see, and where would those be accessed?
They actually are currently on, well, two places. One, they are on the LACC website, so you can Google LACCE, and those will be posted there, as well as we have them on the staff reports that we've done, both to the council and to the commission and committee. So if you go to both of those, to the city's website and look up those committees and commissions, you'll find those from the June 28th meeting and from the Parks, Hillside, and Utilities Committee, or June 29th actually, and then also the July, what was that, the 2 days ago? Well, it was last weekend, the 20, last Thursday, the 12th. Thank you, the 12th. It's a Monday. It's hard to remember everything.
Well, thank you very much for doing this. It's been wonderful to have this opportunity to really begin to understand what's going on.
Thank you.